This is a discussion that can almost be considered a comic book discussion, but the reasons for why the Christopher Nolan, Christian Bale Batman films of 2005 through 2012 are not incorporated into, or possibly had become the foundations for the DC Extended Universe, is much better mentioned and described in the terms of a film or televisional discussion debate. Realistically, it's no longer possible for the films to be the base for an extended DC Comics film universe. But we can look back upon the films and theorize what could have been. Mostly, it has to do with the circumstances that the Nolan films were in shortly after the trilogy was completed. Christian Bale and Christopher Nolan had worked together for a number of years, and the pair were actually a bit tired from the constant and almost back-to-back filming and such related media that the films had to go through in order to be released at that time. Nolan clearly had enough, but Bale was willing to see what more could possibly come out of it. Rumors were at the time that he was offered $50 million to reprise his portrayal of Batman and Bruce Wayne for the Man of Steel film, which would have been one of the official, technical, real starting points for the DC Extended Universe. But apparently those deals went through, and bad business decisions by all had Ben Affleck take over as Batman and Bruce Wayne. But that's another decision that many do regret to this day. Popular consensus was that yes, the Nolan Batman films were supposed to be the start of the DCEU, but problems kept getting in the way before such was made official. Green Lantern was released in 2011 and was an absolute disaster. Man of Steel was released in 2013 and was only an average film at best. Ideas to connect the brilliant trilogy to these subpar films quickly disappeared as DC didn't want to anger movie viewers and comic fans more than they already did. Adding more to the situation for the trilogy standing alone was comments by Bale himself mentioning that the film stood alone, not really connected to what would later become the DCEU as we now know it. Mostly it can be viewed as bad timing when the films were produced and released. For example, if Nolan's Batman series of any part were related to the Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman timeline, then Batman Begins would have to take place at least 20 years previously, and Dark Knight Rises would have to be at least 10 years before Batman vs Superman. The timeline chronologically doesn't exactly stand up for an older Batman to really fit with the Nolan films. Relating the disconnect from DC and Warner Brothers to a possible shared film universe like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, some at the time considered it from a business point of view that DC didn't want the movies to connect on the same level or in the same process that Marvel did. Despite the first Avengers film being released the same year that The Dark Knight Rises, and Captain America, the first Avenger, being released a year before in 2011. DC officials from a business point of view again did not expect Marvel to do things so well with all of the films connecting and at the same time standing alone. DC and Warner Brothers knew that the Marvel films would be in the range of what the prior Nolan films made and even previous Marvel films in terms of revenue and publicity. However, when the first Avengers made over $1.5 billion in combined sales from all outlets, DC knew that they had lost out on a gold mine. With Avengers bringing together heroes from multiple but existing and separate franchises together for the first time, this feat could have been done technically, theoretically, by them first with a possible Batman and Superman movie done correctly, and before or during the same time that the trilogy was released. DC had the early start in terms of when the films were released, and consensus was at the time that the Batman films were done better overall in terms of story plot, possible franchise direction, and actors and actresses associated with the films. In the showdown after the Avengers films, the standoff between DC and Marvel, DC blinked first and cracked under pressure. Batman vs Superman was released in 2016 and was a complete disaster. It should also be known that there were plenty of problems from the time after the Avengers was released in 2012 to when the film was finally released in 2016. A period of years, and within those years, a lot has happened, none of which were good. Unlike the positive film decisions that Marvel had done, DC had constant problems and eventually forced out a poor film as a result. It's also crucial to know that if the Nolan films are indeed the foundation originally for the DC Extended Universe, it's also mentioned that Bruce retired from the mantle of Batman and passed it on to Robin within the final film, within The Dark Knight Rises. A final insult is what could have been. In relation to that idea, Nolan actually did put plans into place when the trilogy finished. What's interesting is that in interviews he did mention that the ending was supposed to give the impression that it was the concept that anyone could be Batman, not exactly Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Robin to be Nightwing. The ending was open to interpretation for what might ever come afterwards, film-wise, in DC films or franchises. Quote, "To me, for that mission to succeed it has to end, so this is the ending for me. And as I say, the open-minded elements are all to do with the thematic idea that Batman was not important as a man, he's more than that. He's a symbol and that symbol lives on." End quote. It's a wasted opportunity because Nolan and Bale left the ending of the trilogy to debate, and something that could have been possibly used by DC from a business angle as well to possibly set up in terms of future DC films of a franchise right there. It did seem like the perfect time to have done something without being too far behind Marvel's films that were released at the time, or be in Marvel's franchise model's shadow. The wasted opportunity can be looked upon finally is that even if the idea is somehow used in the future, it wouldn't be right because the time to have successfully done it has long since passed. With the DC Extended Universe the way it is now, all we can do is look back to how it might have started originally with the Dark Knight trilogy films.